Welcome to the School of Love, the place where miracles are normal. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the School of Love, the place where we learn practical tools based on scientific research and our own experiences towards improving ourselves, living life to its fullest, and contributing to the best of our abilities to the world around us. I am Dr. Maria Grajdian, and I'm a professor of media studies and anthropology at Hiroshima University. In my free time, I am doing my best to guide you in building up a life of contentment, joy, and fulfillment, while applying lessons learned in school to overcome the difficulties, challenges, and insecurities of the real world. In today's video, I share my thoughts on marriage and what it means in late modernity, while focusing on details which transcend classical statements, highlighting immediate, superficial data and results. I believe it is important to ask ourselves fundamental questions related to the times we are living in and to the world we are going to pass on to our children and to future generations, beneath ideological constraints or political, economical concerns. In this video, I start with a definition of marriage and some of its characteristics, such as contractual dimensions, commitment, intergenerational contract and lineage, children, love, sexuality, social contract, and then I ponder on the perils of forgetting or ignoring the lessons of his history, with specific focus on recent developments. And now, first things first, that is two important disclaimers. The first disclaimer serves to strongly emphasize the fact that this YouTube channel, The School of Love, is not part of my educational and research activities at Hiroshima University. It is nonetheless part of my privilege, joy, and sense of duty to propagate and implement knowledge, information, as well as motivation and inspiration outside the limited framework of academic endeavors. Together, we can build up a better tomorrow for as many of us as possible. The second disclaimer relates to the fact that I am a trained musician and musicologist, not a psychologist, therapist, or counselor. The ideas I am sharing in my videos reflect my deep-going preoccupation with life, my own life and other people's lives, and express the results of my experiences, research, and for better or for worse, failures, and my recovery from those failures, recovery which is continuously ongoing. The ideas expressed in the videos on this channel named The School of Love cannot and may not and must not replace the consultation with specialists in whichever areas of your life you might have questions or you might struggle with. If you are new to this channel, at this moment I would like to ask you to please consider subscribing, sharing, liking, commenting. Thank you very, very much. This helps us not only with that mysterious algorithm which seems to dominate the YouTube galaxy, but also with contributing to the expansion of the community of humans doing their best to impact positively the world and those around them by discovering their authentic selves and living life wholeheartedly. Thanks again. And now back to today's topic, which is marriage. So what is marriage? As I said, I'll start with the definition. The marriage is a contract, is a contract between two people who decide to spend their life together, the rest of their lives together, for in good and bad times, in times of health and sickness, and to support each other until death will part them. So, and as I said, so first of all, it's important to understand that marriage is contract and has very clear clauses of what commitment means and of this intergenerational contract. So what we owe to our parents and what we owe to our children. So children are, particularly in traditional societies, so generally speaking, traditionally speaking, classically speaking, children are part of this social contract named marriage and is supposed to ensure the continuation of the family lineage and the perpetuation of the society. So recently in this social contract named called marriage, which is the strongest contract you will ever encounter in any society. That's why it's so difficult to break it. Additional layers of love and sexuality have been added, but it's important to understand that marriage as we know it nowadays, um, of love marriage, of romantic marriage, is a social construction of the 19th century under the influence of the romantic movement. Prior to that, prior to the 19th century, so mid 19th century, marriage always occurred out of political, economic interest, or both. So marriages were actually alliances between political parties, so at level of countries, of nations, countries, or smaller segments, or economic interests among families. So, for instance, in order to keep the family possessions, the family land, two families would decide to marry their children so that the family wealth does not get fragmented and then dissipates. But this idea of love marriage, in which two people love each other and get married out of love, this didn't exist prior to 19th century. And we all know the story of Romeo and Juliet. And I always refer to Romeo and Juliet as a social phenomenon, as emotional cannibalism for I don't know, 500 years now, or 500 years. We are looking at this tragedy, right, which was initially actually a comedy. Shakespeare meant it as a comedy to display the perils of not listening to your parents and to the elders, and to do whatever you want. So, and for so many centuries, we are watching and enjoying the tragedy of those two kids, and we're finding explanations as to why they were so cruelly punished for and not being allowed to fulfill their dreams and to follow their hearts and so on. And I'm always thinking, do we realize the level of, as I said, cannibalist pleasure we derive from watching those two teenagers suffering within the narrative construction? And that was actually very normal back then, that people couldn't fulfill their heart's desire, and they had to submit to the society's pressure. And love marriage became the fashion and the idea in an era in which humans still lived 20 to 25 years in average, as boys died in wars or in labor accidents, and girls died in childbirth or the consequences of childbirth, such as bleeding, infections, or extreme weakness. So when let's say people started to marry because they loved each other, more often than not against the will of the parents or of the families. But still, it happened in an era in which people used to live 20 to 25 years, so they died very young. And so it was like this, so if we talk about maybe, so let's say, even if a wealthy man, for instance, would marry a poor girl, which actually never happened, but let's say it did happen exceptionally, or let's say even within this upper class, the landowners, these were the upper class up to late 18th century, when industrial revolution or industrial progress started to gain pace. So the lady would die in childbirth, even if we talk about the upper class, and she would die in childbirth. The man would remarry, and then the second wife would die again in childbirth or as a consequence of childbirth, and then he will remarry a second, third, fourth time. So serial monogamy on the side of men was actually the rule. And of course, so, and you can imagine at the level of the general population, which was 99.99% of the population, the situation was much more dire. So love marriage, the way we conceptualize it nowadays, has emerged in an era in which people lived very short lives from today's perspective. So nowadays, when during less than 2 generations, average life expectancies for the general population essentially have quadrupled or at least tripled, it is both unrealistic and cruel to imagine and to require on a mass scale that two people stay in love and stay committed to each other for decades, while raising children and shaping the communities around them and leading productive, harmonious lives. So this is absolutely, um, it is unrealistic and cruel. Of course there are exceptions. So even if, as an ideal to which only a minority of gifted people has access, this model appears as highly unrealistic. Of course, we have models of people who lived happily together for, I don't know, 70 years, 80 years, 100 years, I don't know, but they are tiny minority. It's very important to understand this. Not Robert Fisher, Helen Fisher, the anthropologist Helen Fisher, who has studied love and marriage, and and children rearing, education in parenting, what we call nowadays parenting, but actually it's about rearing children for decades and within various societies, so not only Western model. She explained this very clearly, that marriage emerged at the dawn of time as a model to ensure procreation of the species, but it wasn't meant to be, and to ensure the and to ensure the avoidance of incest, which leads to the weakening of the species of the DNA. But it wasn't meant as an eternal monogamous relation or connection. Yeah. So people would, so humans, a woman and a man would come together, have a baby, raise that baby or the child up to an age where it became a sort of independent, and then part, which would happen usually between 4 and 5, 6 years. So serial monogamy was actually the rule, because also the fundamental rule of nature is diversity, expansion and diversity. So is that expansion, and in order to have continuous expansion with small periods of contraction of relaxation and contraction, but expansion is a fundamental rule of the universe. And in order to have this continuous expansion, we need diversity. And you do not create diversity with monogamy for 100 years. You create diversity through serial monogamy. So it's important to understand that this type of romantic marriage based to last forever. Yeah? In times of when people, in which life expectancy, average life expectancy for humans is 80, 90 years old, this is unrealistic and to a certain degree even cruel, because we force people into patterns into expectations which cannot be fulfilled. And yes, we have exceptions, but those exceptions are exceptions to confirm the rule, to validate the rule. And we shouldn't try to build up humans on life models, on the model of the elite, of the less than 1% of the population. We should see what's realistic and what actually works with nature. Which brings me to this concept of serial monogamy, which used to be the norm for wealthy male members of the society throughout the centuries and millennia, and used to be also the norm for people, for humans, before this sort of complex over individual societies have become the norm. So serial monogamy is set to become the norm both for men and for women. While it might still take a while until this alternative existential trajectory will prevail, it is nonetheless important to acknowledge that its emergence and propagation on a larger scale is inevitable. It's a question of when and how rather than if. So we won't have for long while. We already have all these changes happening within society, where people choose not to marry. Yeah? People choose not to marry because marriage is such a heavy burden, contractually speaking. And in most society, I think in all society, in order to get a divorce, you have to go to court as if you are a criminal. And people want to avoid it. It's a very complex and complicated procedure. And particularly if one of the party does not want, and usually one party does not want, because one party always has some benefits while the other party has some detriments. And this is one of the fundamental problem of marriage as it exists nowadays. Is one on hand is unrealistic. It has become unrealistic due to very long life expectancy compared to when the model emerged. Firstly, secondly, it is a zero-sum game. This means by getting married, one party always has some benefits, while the other party loses something. I'm not going to get into this topic, but I think it's fundamental to understand this. Marriage, as we see it nowadays, is unrealistic and to a certain degree cruel due to the changing life expectancy and life circumstances of most humans. And secondly, it is the way it is built. It is a zero-sum game. One partner has tremendous benefits. One partner has the same tremendous detriments. Very important to understand this. And one further dimension of or detriment or problem of marriage is that parents within a marriage, parents actually, because of all these dysfunctions which emerge throughout decades, parents cannot let go of their children, so that the younger generation live its own life. And what is happening is that so that the younger generation cannot live its own life free from the projections and expectation of the older generation. And the main reason for the increasing toxicity of the current global world is the iron grip older generation have over younger generations, and the relentless struggle for power between generations, which transcends by far the earlier generational gap. In addition, we have this inability of older generation to accept their own sunset, the fact that you are not the center of the universe anymore, but we have all over the world gerontocracies. Gerontocracies are these systems in which all people govern, and they impose and determine the direction, the situation of the world and the direction in which the world is moving, but they won't live to experience the consequences of their decisions now. So the sooner the older generations learn to accept with dignity and courage that they are passé, past, the better will be for current and for future generations. This is actually I would say, so there are three problems of the current marriage model as we know it. The first one is that we live much longer lives. The second one is that it is a zero-sum game. So when two people get married, one has some tremendous benefits while the other loses in the same amount. And thirdly is that within the marriage system nowadays, there is still this patriarchal structure which allows for older people, the older they get, the more powerful they become, and they make decisions to their own benefits, which have actually bad consequences for the future, for a future in which they will not live to suffer the consequences, and this is why they do not care about it. So this will be a kind of controversial video. But I think it is important to start the discussion, and as always, I'm looking forward for feedback. And thank you for joining me today, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you here very soon again. Love and peace to you all.